transporte, nosotros prácticamente nos teníamos que ir a pie de acá, todo estaba semi-destruido, teníamos que limpiar la ciudad.
And that was just one thing. When we got here, there was no public transportation. We had to go everywhere by foot and had to, in the process, work towards cleaning and repairing.
Sí, y bueno, sin comida y bueno, explotados de esa forma, es imposible pagar la deuda.
And exploited without even eating, how were we to pay? It was impossible for us to pay back our debt.
Tenía problemas en el Perú con los bancos que me habían prestado el dinero para venir acá.
I had problems in Peru with the banks that loaned me money to come here.
Y bueno, comencé a organizar a mis compañeros trabajadores.
And I began to organize my co-workers in this situation here.
Let me just clarify something. You borrowed money to come here.
Claro.
Yes, of course.
Did you borrow it? Was there an interest rate attached to it?
Claro, los bancos cobran intereses.
Yeah, of course, banks charge interest.
Okay, all right. We just want to be clear about that. So when you came, you were working first at a hotel. Where were you working? You were first working at a hotel.
Claro, lo que pasa es que esta visa tú llegas con un solo patrón, o sea, no te puedes cambiar a otro patrón.
Yes. So you understand, under these visas, these guest worker visas, you have to work for only one employer.
Y si tú quieres,
Wait, 1 second. Did there come a time that you leave that employer?
Sí, justamente después de que comencé a organizar a mis compañeros.
Yeah, precisely because after I began to organize my compañeros,
ellos, el patrón se dio cuenta, tuvimos una reunión con él y yo fui despedido por organizar a mi gente.
And the boss, of course, found out about it, and I was fired for organizing my people.
Entonces no me quedó otra forma porque estaba debiendo dinero en el Perú, no me quedó otra cosa que buscar otro trabajo.
So, because I had to pay back that debt in Peru, I had no choice but to find some other work.
Y bueno, yo sé que ya despedido no tenía otra opción, ¿no? Pero si tú normalmente no puedes cambiarte de empleador, porque si no eres fácilmente deportable.
But you have to understand, under these visas, you can't just, if you don't like a job, go and find another job, because you're bound to one employer, and if you try to do something else, you're easily deportable.
Okay. You said that when you first came, you lived at this hotel that you were working on. So where did you go to after you were fired? Where did you move to? Pardon me.
Tuve que pedir el apoyo de algunos amigos y compañeros para que ya vivían acá para poder vivir arrimado en su casa.
I had to find friends who lived here already and ask them if they could just put me up in their homes.
Approximately how many hours did you work when you were working on this hotel? How many hours a day or a week did you work, if you remember?
Bueno, ellos nos prometieron 40, pero en realidad trajeron tantos trabajadores, trajeron 300 trabajadores de Perú, Bolivia y de República Dominicana, que solamente nos daban entre 20 y 25 a la semana.
As I said, we were promised 40 hours, but they brought so many of these guest workers, 300 of them from Peru, Dominican Republic, and Bolivia, that there just wasn't enough work to go around. We got 20, 25 hours a week of work.
Okay. Do you have a family?
Sí, tengo esposa y 2 hijos en Lima que los extraño y me están esperando.
Yes, I have a wife and 2 kids in Lima who I greatly miss. They're waiting for me.
Does your wife work?
Tiene la obligación de trabajar porque con lo poco que le puedo mandar no le alcanza.
She has no choice but to work because with the little money that I make, she has to make ends meet.
How old are your children?
Mi hijo mayor tiene 13 años y mi hijita tiene 6.
My older boy is 13 years old. My little girl is 6.
Has your stay in the United States lived up to your expectations when you arrived?
La verdad que no, porque yo esperaba en el país que dice que hay libertad, encontrar la libertad, pero sin embargo veo que ni a sus nacionales ni a su gente, como son los afroamericanos, le dan la total libertad, menos me la van a dar a mí.
Not at all. It did not live up at all, and I realized that in this country that's supposed to be the land of freedom, they don't even grant freedoms and rights to their own people, particularly to African Americans. So why the hell would they give me, of all people, any rights?
Y bueno, y por eso nosotros estamos tratando de crear relaciones entre nuestras dos comunidades, la latina y la afroamericana, para que podamos, unidos, podamos salir adelante.
And that is why we are seeking to build relations and alliance between Latinos and African Americans, so that together we can move and strive and go forward.
You answered what would be my last question, but I would like to go back to the question of the relationship between migrant workers, immigrant workers, and African Americans, and how would you characterize those relationships? And are there tensions that you see within those relationships?
Bueno, les cuento una anécdota de que me pasó al principio.
Yes, well, I want to just tell you an anecdote, something happened to me when I got here.
Cuando yo llegué y estaba trabajando en los hoteles, veía que la gente afro estaba en los hoteles viviendo en los cuartos de que FEMA pagaba.
When I arrived, I saw that African Americans were living in the hotels that FEMA was paying for them.
Y yo le pregunté a mi manager, señor, ¿y por qué ustedes no contratan gente de acá que están no tienen trabajo? ¿Por qué no le dan el trabajo a ustedes a ellos?
And I asked the manager, I said, I don't understand. They're African Americans who want to work. Why don't you hire them to work?
Y ellos me respondieron, no, es lo que pasa que los negros son ociosos.
And what the manager said is the problem is that the blacks are lazy.
Y eso nos hace pensar. Yo en ese momento no lo reflexioné, pero después me hice pensar que ellos nos manipulan a nuestras dos comunidades.
I didn't realize it at first, but it soon became clear to me that what they're doing is trying to manipulate our two communities.
A nosotros nos dicen eso, que ustedes son flojos, y a ustedes le dicen que nosotros les robamos su trabajo.
On one hand, they tell us that you are lazy, and they tell you that we are here to steal their jobs.
Y eso no es cierto. Nosotros somos hermanos y tenemos que vivir juntos y tratar de superarnos juntos.
And of course, neither of those things is true. We have to work as sisters and brothers and to move forward and improve our lot together.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is there any question? Yes.
Gracias, hermano, compañero de Honduras y
Thank you, compañero from Honduras.
el compañero
He's from Peru.
de Perú, Daniel, por su valiente exposición.
From Peru, I'm sorry, for your courageous presentation.
Sabemos que su posición no es fácil en este país, en este momento,
I know that your situation in this country at this moment is not easy.
cuando este gobierno cada día más arrecia su política xenofóbica
When
con la ley de migración.
it's really heightening its xenophobic policies with this new laws on immigration.
Por el testimonio de Denny y de Daniel, creo que estamos ante formas contemporáneas de esclavitud.
What I think through the testimonies of Dennis and Danielle, we're facing new forms of slavery.
Y al mismo tiempo, una vez más, se está violando la Convención de los Derechos de los Trabajadores Migratorios,
And at the same time, what's being violated are the conventions pertaining to the rights of immigrant workers
en su artículo 11.
in its Article 11 of migrant workers.
Al mismo tiempo, nuestros hermanos
At the same time, our brothers
nos invitan a no caer en manipulación
call upon us not to fall into their manipulations and
de
maneuvers
los mismos explotadores de ayer y de hoy.
put forward by the same exploiters yesterday and today.
Quiero una pregunta para ti.
Now, question for you.
El año pasado cuando fuimos invitados, el precomité para Katrina, el comité internacional,
Last year, when we were invited here, this pre-committee for this tribunal, the International Commission of Inquiry,
tuvimos la oportunidad de participar en una asamblea con ustedes
we were able to participate in an assembly of workers with you.
y de verdad vimos ya la situación de neoesclavitud en que estaban sometidos.
And there we saw firsthand the situation of neo-slavery to which you were subjected.
Quisiéramos conocer cuáles son esas otras compañías explotadoras que allá van a nuestros países a vender el sueño americano. Es importante que el pueblo de New Orleans,
We'd like to know what are these corporations
Que los
and what are the networks.
que los jueces que estamos aquí, sepamos cuáles son esas compañías, y es importante que asumamos una posición pública para denunciarlos públicamente por fomentar la nueva esclavitud.
We need, as judges, to know the names of these corporations, the networks that they use to so-called sell this American dream. We need to have their names so that we can denounce these forms of neo-slavery to world public opinion.
Bueno, nombrarte a todos, esto es la punta del iceberg solamente.
To name them all, it's difficult. This is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yo ahora estoy organizando trabajadores H2B como yo, y yo he visto en toda la costa del Golfo, desde Mississippi hasta Texas, con la Alianza de Trabajadores Huéspedes.
With the Alliance of Guest Workers, we've seen from all of the work that we've done from one area to the other in the Gulf Coast.
Y veo que esto es una cosa que es muy grande, es un negocio muy grande.
We see that it's a big business, and this scourge is extremely widespread.
Hay miles de nombres de reclutadores locales de nuestros países de orígenes.
There are thousands of recruiters and networks in our countries.
Y miles de reclutadores locales acá que hacen el trabajo de traer a las personas, ¿no? Y todos ellos ganan un dinero por nosotros.
And then the networks in our own countries, all of them making monies off of our backs.
Esto, bueno, yo le puedo decir en el caso mío, por ejemplo, la persona que el reclutador local del Perú me reclutó es Interjobs.
The recruiter in Peru that came was called Interjobs.
La reclutadora de acá que nos trajo, que contactó con Interjobs, se llama Virginia Pickerings.
Virginia Pickerings is the one that contracted with Interjobs.
Y el mal patrón que tuve se llama Patrick Quinn III.
And the bad boss that I had was Patrick Quinn III.
Ustedes lo conocen porque es hijo predilecto de Nueva Orleans, en lo mal sentido de la palabra.
And I think you know him because he's the chosen child of New Orleans in the bad sense of the word.
Bueno, y esto no se acaba, es un cáncer nacional. Originalmente la visa fue hecha para si tú no tenías trabajadores en tu empresa, que nadie quería trabajar en esa empresa, podías traerlos del extranjero.
The original purpose of this law, we understand, was that if there weren't enough people locally to be able to do your job, you could go beyond your borders to find somebody to do that job.
Pero sin embargo ahora hay muchas compañías que solamente se dedican a traer gente para rentarlas o venderlas.
But now we know that there are all these companies and networks whose only job is to hire us and rent us out.
En sell y venderlas, claramente.
And sell us.
Tenemos el caso documentado de dos personas que fueron vendidas por $2,000. O sea, ellos vieron el dinero que iba pasando de una mano a otra, pasando de una compañía a otra.
And I want to say sold, because there was a transaction here. We saw this directly from one company to another. $2,000 were exchanged to sell two of our compañeros.
Entonces esto ya no es solamente que necesitas trabajadores en tu compañía, sino es un negocio.
This is a business now. It's not a question of not being able to find a specific person to do a job in your company.
Y eso tiene que ya parar. Tenemos que unirnos y y tratar de parar esto, porque esto es, como dijeron, es una forma nueva de esclavitud.
And that has to stop, because as was said here, this is a new form of slavery.
Es la continuación de los programas Bracero y los programas que vinieron antes de Bracero, solamente le cambian el nombre y sigue siendo lo mismo,
And this
esclavitud.
is just, it's the continuation of the Bracero programs and other such with different names, just a new form of the same slavery.
Are there other questions? Yes, sir.
Sabes que el gobierno de Perú acaba de firmar con el gobierno de Bush un tratado de libre comercio.
You know that the Peruvian government just signed with the U.S. government a free trade agreement.
¿Consideras que este tratado de libre comercio tiene una relación directa con todo lo que tú estás diciendo, es decir, con contratar esclavos peruanos para venir a trabajar aquí a Estados Unidos?
Do you think that this free trade agreement is related or linked in any way to the situation that you've described here, of forcing, leaving your country in order to be used, sold and hired in slavery conditions that you've described here?
Lo digo porque la experiencia de México es esta.
I say that because our experience in Mexico is just that.
El Tratado de Libre Comercio de México con Estados Unidos, Canadá,
The North American Free Trade Agreement with the
durante
United
los
States
últimos
and Canada,
6 años
during the last 6 years alone,
significó 600,000 migrantes, es decir, 3 millones de trabajadores mexicanos que fueron obligados a salir por falta de empleo, por miseria. ¿Sí?
in each of those 6 years, 600,000 Mexicans were forced to leave their countries. That is a total of 3 million people crossing the border, seeking out a means to feed their families.
Agregaría una cuestión más.
I would add,
Hoy Bush, el Congreso norteamericano, es decir, Partido Demócrata y Republicano,
today both
han aprobado una nueva legislación
a new piece of legislation has just been approved here, I would add, both by Democrats and Republicans,
cuyo contenido, de acuerdo a migrantes, y estoy de acuerdo con ellos, significa la expulsión. En México se calcula de 2 millones de mexicanos que van a ser expulsados para traer nuevos migrantes en las condiciones que tú estás describiendo, es decir, en condiciones 1000 veces peores que en el pasado.
and whose consequences, both in terms of its policies in Mexico of destruction of jobs and the conditions that confront migrant workers, are going to be exactly what you've described, but if you can imagine, it's even worse, perhaps.
Sí, yo veo, bueno, lo tengo ahora como organizador, veo muchos casos y justamente estamos con un grupo de mexicanos que están pasando, si no lo mismo, de repente peor de lo que he pasado yo.
Yes, as an organizer, I've made these connections, and I began to work with a lot of the Mexican migrant workers who are going through what I went through perhaps much worse.
Y sí, considero que este tipo de convenios no solamente son de convenios de libre comercio, de mercancías, sino de personas también.
And I believe that these free trade agreements are not only ones regarding trade, but that have an impact so greatly our people.
Existe algumas novas áreas econômicas, né? Algumas nem tão novas. O narcotráfico é uma das indústrias mais rentáveis no mundo.
There are new areas of industry. The drug trafficking and drug trafficking industry is one of the biggest businesses.
Existe a indústria de armamentos também, que são uma das mais rentáveis. E há mais uma que está colocada na ordem do dia, que é a questão do tráfico de pessoas.
And now the trafficking of peoples.
Para o trabalho escravo,
for this.
prostituição, doação, retirada de órgãos. Então são situações bastante duras e dramáticas, mas são as realidades que estão aí para nós colocar.
And what we're now witnessing is the trafficking of peoples, the trafficking of prostitution, all of these as part of these new realities foisted upon us.
E todas fazem parte daquela coisa que eu já vinha colocando, da questão do projeto de genocídio da população negra e pobre no mundo.
And I think this can only be seen in light of this genocide that's being carried out against blacks and poor people the world over.
A questão do terceiro ponto que eu colocava, que é justamente o que a história colocou como função para o Estado, a questão a questão da educação, saúde, moradia, transporte,
And the
etc.
questions that have been raised in conventions, the question of housing, health care, transportation, basic rights.
E essa nova fase do capitalismo, eles colocam essa coisa do enxugamento do Estado. E isso está na ordem do dia a nível mundial.
And what now is on the order of the day is the state engaging from any responsibilities to carry through on those obligations and commitments, and that's happening all over the world.
A coisa muito mais aguda aqui nos Estados Unidos, que é o carro-chefe do capitalismo mundial, do imperialismo, né? Das ações mesmo de colonialismo, né? E nós precisamos, nós os movimentos sociais, temos que dar um grande salto de qualidade.
And we in the social movements have to make a big qualitative step in this new phase of capitalism, of imperialism, whose major whose voice and whose major organizing centers here in the United States. We have to respond.
Eu acho de fundamental importância as ações que você vem fazendo, e nós temos que estreitar as nossas ações, né? Agora eu queria acrescentar mais uma coisinha. Por exemplo, o DDN, por exemplo, ele poderia estar participando aqui com a gente, que é um representante da área da discriminação racial da Organização das Nações Unidas.
In relation to the struggle against discrimination in the United Nations,
muitos debates que estão sendo colocados aqui, muitas denúncias, acho que tem que ser organizado para dar entrada na Organização dos Estados Americanos, porque nós temos que colocar as contradições lá também.
We have to take all of this to the United Nations, even to the OAS, and utilize the contradictions that exist within those bodies.
É um absurdo, por exemplo, que esse tribunal, realizado aqui em Nova Orleans, tem apenas um vereador de Nova York, e nós trouxemos aqui 2 deputados estaduais. Tem um deputado federal que não pôde vir em função de programas de trabalho. Mas o movimento aqui nos Estados Unidos tem que pressionar essas esferas, eles têm que solucionar. Nós sabemos que a maioria, que o parlamento é podre, está a serviço do capital, são vendidos, mas nós temos que estar pressionando e agindo também nessas instâncias.
We have to seek, it appears to me, greater allies among elected officials. We have from Brazil here 2 state deputies. There was a federal deputy who was supposed to be here, wasn't able to at the last minute. I think we have to take our cause here and take it to higher levels.
E agradeço a oportunidade, e a nossa ação, acho que tem que haver alianças, e nós temos que abrir um leque amplo de ações, né?
And we have to, it seems to me, widen our relations and work together closely with you so we can put an end to this. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? No further questions? Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Bueno, muchas gracias.
Okay, with your honor's indulgence, I need to make an announcement. The rule, because we're photographing, videotaping these proceedings, we are asking photographers to not use flash at all. I've seen several flashes go off within the last half hour. That is the rule. So I need for us to be mindful of that. Moreover, if we have cell phones, please put them on silent or on vibrate.
Do you have room for one more announcement?
Yes.
Questions, not statements.
Beg your pardon?
In the interest of time, if
Oh.
we're going to finish, we need to pose questions to the witnesses only. Or we're not going to finish.
So I guess we're talking to our...
Just for the future, as we move forward.
Okay.
Otherwise, we're not going to finish.
Okay. Questions only. Questions only for the panel.
We have another period of time in the proceedings when statements of
Yes.
solidarity can be made.
I'm assuming our translators have translated those comments? Okay, they did. Okay, thank you. Our next area will be voting rights, and the attorney who's going to be presenting in that area is Kristan Clark. Kristan Clark.
Salud.
Good afternoon. My name is Kristan Clark, and I'll be presenting evidence and testimony today concerning violations of against the fundamental right to vote and evidence of wide-scale disenfranchisement among African American voters here in the state of Louisiana in the aftermath of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. I believe it'll be clear following the presentation of this evidence that African American voters have encountered significant barriers in their efforts to continue participating in the political process here in Louisiana following the hurricanes. And I want to start off my presentation by just making brief reference to some international laws and federal laws here that certainly have application in this context. We know that this will not be the first natural disaster of this kind, and thus I think the evidence will show that more efforts can and certainly should be taken to help preserve greater levels of access for voters in the chance that another major natural disaster should befall our country, or war, or some other unnatural event. The Article 5 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which was signed by the United States almost 10 years ago on October 5th of 1997, states that states shall undertake to prohibit and eliminate racial discrimination in all forms and guarantee that the right of everyone in the enjoyment of political rights is protected. The right to participate in elections, including the right to vote and the right to stand for election. In addition, Article 25 of that covenant states that every citizen shall have the right and opportunity to vote and to be elected at genuine periodic elections, which shall be by universal and equal suffrage. In addition, Principle 22 of the Guiding Principles on Internal Displacement state that internally displaced persons, whether or not they are living in camps, shall not be discriminated against as a result of displacement in the enjoyment of the right to vote. In addition, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which is often hailed as one of the most significant pieces of federal legislation ever passed by the U.S. Congress, states that no voting qualification, practice, or procedure shall be imposed by any state in a manner which results in denial or abridgment of the right to vote on the basis of race. So I think these international and federal laws kind of set up the context for the testimony and evidence that you're going to hear today. The first witness that you'll be hearing from is a state legislator who will provide a first-hand account of what it was like voting in New Orleans post-Katrina and the challenges associated with serving in the capacity as an elected official following Katrina. So I'll go ahead at this time and call my first witness, State Representative Juan Lafanta. May I ask that the witness be sworn in? Oh, okay. Do you promise to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I will.
Can you please state your name for the record?
Juan A. Lafanta.
Is everyone able to hear? Yeah.
Okay.
First time somebody said they couldn't hear me. Juan A. LaFonta.
And where do you live?
I live in New Orleans, Louisiana, in the 7th Ward area of New Orleans, near
Okay.
Gentilly.
And what's your occupation?
I'm an attorney. I'm a state representative. I'm a professor at Dillard University and an advocate for people.
Okay. And how long have you served as a state representative, and which area do you represent?
Served as a state representative for about 2.5 years, and I represent Gentilly, which is where one of the levee breaks actually took place.
Okay. Now, at the time of Katrina, were you a registered voter here in New Orleans?
Yes, I was.
And today, are you a registered voter here in New Orleans?
Yes, I am.
And were you impacted by Katrina? Were you displaced from your home?
Yeah, I lost my home. My home was completely devastated. Whole community I grew up in was devastated, and I was displaced, and all my family was throughout the country.
And at the time that Katrina struck, were you a member of the state legislature?
Yes, I was.
Now, where did you end up following the storm?
Well, that's a funny question. Before the storm, before the levees broke, the state elected officials were advised to basically leave the city and go to higher ground. So I relocated myself and certain family members to Atlanta, Georgia. And as soon as I knew the levees broke, I drove back along the coast to basically pull people out. And from that time forward, I've had like about, I guess, 3 or 4 different addresses, 3 in the state of Louisiana, 1 I had forwarded to New York, and another one in Atlanta.
Okay. Now, at the time that you had 3 or 4 different addresses, were you continuing to receive mail from New Orleans?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And so the registrar's office, which is where elected officials operate out of here locally, if the registrar's office sent you a parcel of mail, would you have received it?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Now, let's talk about the constituency that you represent as a state legislature. Can you describe your constituency?
Oh, I have a diverse constituency. It actually is a microcosm of the city of New Orleans. I have a 70% black district. It's 30% white, 6% Republican, I think about 94% Democrat. I may have between 20 to 30 gay voters in my district. And I have everything from the French Quarter in Gentilly, environmental activists, people's rights activists, to the most conservative of folks that are part of the electorate.
If you were to put an estimate on the number of persons who immediately following Katrina remained in your district, remained at their residence, what would you put that number at?
I would say we probably had about maybe 10 or 15% of the people from the district still here after the flood, and since then we're probably back up to about 50% to 60% in the district.
Okay. So let's proceed chronologically. So in around September of 2005, you had about 10 to 15% of your constituents.
About that.
And the first elections that were held here in New Orleans following Katrina, do you remember roughly when that was?
Yeah, I remember that. That election was extremely difficult. I played a significant role in that election because I tried to assist Ray Nagin in his re-election. What was happening was all the statistical information and data that we had received was basically flawed. 80% to 90% of the telephone numbers we had received did not work. So we had to find out what actual centers, what hubs people were using nationally for New Orleans people to get information, so we could target them to actually get them information about what was going on in New Orleans and in what direction they wanted us to carry forward for their cause.
So the first mayoral elections, were those held roughly in the spring of 2006?
Roughly then, yes.
Talk about some of the challenges associated with trying to reach people who were displaced at that time.
Well, first of all, we had to deal with the Secretary of State's office, which the one we have now is extremely difficult to deal with, but the one we had before kind of worked with us somewhat. When we gave recommendations to do long-distance voting, satellite voting, kind of like they do in Iraq for Iraqi soldiers or even Iraqi citizens or even Cuban citizens, we were laughed at. You know, majority of the legislature said it's just going to be a bunch of fraud And, it's just going to be people basically buying votes and doing things corrupt. So we're not going to authorize that.
Let me have you stop for a moment and explain this concept of satellite voting. What is satellite voting?
Well, satellite voting for the purpose of the military and people from other countries has been, if you're in another country or you're participating in an election in another country, they would give you a ballot. And basically you could place a vote on that ballot and submit it so your vote could count towards your leadership from your country or wherever you were from. When we tried to apply that same effect on the state here to impact New Orleans so we could have a representative government of the electorate, they stopped us. They blocked us. They said it would be too difficult and it would be fraud across the board. And the conservative right actually jammed us so badly we almost didn't get satellite voting within the state, let alone throughout the nation.
So you encountered resistance among fellow legislators in the
majority of the legislature, and it wasn't a Republican-Democrat issue. We had a majority of Democrats as well as Republicans basically vote against satellite voting as a whole. And we had to walk out of the legislature to give them a point to let them know that basically if you're not supporting our right to vote, then we're not going to support your right to operate in the legislature. So we left. And then we had to have a second vote to actually approve local satellite voting in the state of Louisiana.
Now, when you say we, do you mean the other black legislators?
Yes, ma'am.
So this was a racial issue, black versus white?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So black legislators supported the idea of out-of-state satellite voting while white legislators generally opposed it?
A majority of the white legislators in the state legislature opposed it, and it made for a very difficult environment following a storm. You have all these displaced people and your families everywhere, and you're trying to put your life together, and then you have an organized front of folks telling you basically you can't represent your people, you can't contact your people, and tough. We're going to deal with our issues and how we're going to rebuild around New Orleans. And that was not something we could stand for. And as the Black Caucus, we just took a stand and said that we weren't going to stand for it and walked out.
But ultimately, you didn't prevail in your desire to get out-of-state satellite voting.
No, we didn't. It was laughed at, and they wouldn't even entertain it. And we kept telling them, said, you can give the right to soldiers to vote in Iraq, or even Iraqi citizens here the right to vote in Iraq, but you can't give U.S. citizens the right to vote in their own city, which they don't have the abilities, like financial abilities or wherewithal, to participate. Right. And then on the flip side of that is, how can I as an elected official say I'm representing the interest of my constituencies if I can't be put in contact with them and I can't have them participate in the election? That's the only way they can voice their opinion.
Now, during the legislative session, did you all discuss and talk about the Iraqi example of satellite voting here in the United States?
That was one of our strongest examples to show that it could be fair and it could be something that would not be fraudulent. But there was a very conservative movement in this state to basically push out majority of the citizens in New Orleans and redevelop it as what we used to call Disneyfication, where you go towards large-scale redevelopment by developers and not bring back the community or the culture that New Orleans was known for.
And at the time, to the extent that you were able to interact with persons who were displaced persons indicating you a desire to continue voting and participating in the political process in New Orleans?
Yeah, and one thing, I understand everybody here is from different countries and whatnot, but New Orleans is a very community-oriented city. Our families all go back for generations here and then go back to Haiti and places all over the world. So we're always constantly, we're the group of people who say, you may move away for a couple years before the flood, but you'll always come back to New Orleans because that's home. And every time we would go somewhere else in the country, it was always this strong yearning for people to be home. I'm here because I'm an advocate for that community. I truly believe that it takes a village to raise a child, and what actually happened when the child who was raised tried to advocate for the community, they pulled the community away from us. And that's the position we're in right now.
Ultimately, what were the options available to persons who were outside Louisiana and who desired to continue voting and participating here in?
They had to drive from wherever they were to Louisiana and find the Secretary of State's office or a voter registration office somewhere in the state. Some people drove as many as 16 to 18 hours just to come here election day to vote. Because they couldn't get an absentee mail ballot, they couldn't do an absentee mail ballot because they had changed the addresses so much. So they'd have to drive in on election day to participate.
Can you talk about some of the costs and expense that those voters incurred taking buses and caravans to drive great distances to return to the city?
I've had people, who spent thousands of dollars to get here on a flight because, understand too, the city was still rebuilding, so you didn't have a lot of direct flights into New Orleans, and those were overwhelmed. And we'd bring people in from other states, and we kind of try to shuttle them in from Houston or the nearby places where a lot of people had went to. But folks like I talked to were from Indiana or had got relocated to D.C. or Boston, had to literally drive in a rental car, because also with the flood, a lot of people lost their vehicles, so they didn't have transportation. So literally they would have to rent a car, pay for the gas, and then endure the drive down just to participate to vote.
Let me point your attention to demonstrative exhibit 1. What do you see?
I see a guy on the side of the road with a sign saying displaced voter.
And was that is that reflective of the kind of scene that you saw during elections that were held last year as people tried to return to the city?
Yeah, I saw a lot of that, and what I guess is not in the picture is the fact that a lot of the majority of folks here in the city, majority black folks, were very enraged, and that you can't see the look on his face, but just from the sign you probably figure he's mad. But a lot of black voters here were enraged because they felt like they weren't allowed their own constitutional rights to participate. And in using the Iraqi example, they said, okay, you can help people have wars and do all these things overseas, but you can't help our own people. And then we want to go to other worlds and other countries and tell folks how they should operate their countries, but in their own country don't take care of their own people. So that was something that was really disturbing.
Here we are 2 years out from Katrina. Is it your understanding that displaced persons continue to maintain a desire to vote and participate?
Yeah, but it's difficult because now we have a Secretary of State who mailed out letters to the displaced people saying, if you're still registered to vote in this area, we're going to make you pay taxes on the income you've made while you were displaced. And then after they sent that letter out, they sent another letter out that said basically you're in violation of a federal statute if you vote where you're living now and register there and you go back and vote in New Orleans. So basically it kind of put the fear into people's minds that if you basically participate in your own voting election or you remain registered to vote there, that you would either get taxed or you would have to deal with federal litigation.
Finally, I want to get your your own personal observations about how the elections actually played out last year. Where is your particular polling place?
My particular polling place had been the same place for 30 years on the corner of Norman, Meyer, and Gentilly.
Okay.
It was moved to what they call a mega site at the University of New Orleans, which is a large campus. It's probably one of the largest campuses here in New Orleans. And you had to go in basically, and the Secretary of State directed you to where your precinct was. But just recently, they've relocated the precinct to somewhere else on the campus. So what would happen is you'll have a sign that says, vote here, and you have to walk like a half a mile to 8 blocks and look in on a campus to find your site so you could vote. So it's been really difficult.
Now, I want to bring your attention to demonstrative exhibit number 3. Do you recall what this is? Know what this is?
Yeah, that made a lot of people upset.
And was there tremendous confusion among voters about precisely where they needed to go to cast their ballots during the elections last year?
Yes, it was. And some of the issues we had with this was we have a lot of seniors. New Orleans was about 30-40% made up of seniors. So the folks who actually did come back would actually catch a bus or walk to the precincts. And the people out of town were going to old precincts. When they got there, some people just would not vote because they're like, I can't afford to go catch another bus or spend half a day because there's hardly any public transportation to go to another precinct that was located miles away.
Right. So some people would go to a polling place expecting to vote and be able to cast their ballot, but would encounter a sign directing them elsewhere.
Correct.
And do you know whether all voters received notices about these polling place changes so that they could plan ahead?
No, they didn't receive notice. What happened was they put the notifications on TV, and they ran a couple in the paper. And there's two problems with that. One is not a lot of folks had TVs. Electricity here, by that time, they were trying to stabilize, but they had rolling brownouts, and they only advertised, I think, 1 or 2 nights on television locally. So there was no way that people could really know where their locations were.
And were there persistent problems with mail forwarding at that time and with mail delivery in general?
After Katrina, I received a Christmas card about 9 months after Christmas. So you can imagine if somebody sent you a ballot or notification, you probably got it 9 months to a year afterwards. And we even got information that the post office was throwing away forwarded mail at a certain time because so much of it had collected. And just recently, like the last couple of months, they started saving it because they realized they might be liable for not forwarding the bulk rate postage.
Right. Now, in your view, how important is the right to vote, and how important is the right to vote at this time in New Orleans history?
Well, I think the right to vote is like one of your most important constitutional rights that we have to exercise. People lived and died in the streets of this country to make sure that every person, black, white, or indifferent, had an opportunity to vote and to participate. The reason I'm here today is because, like I said, that village of people who are not, we didn't have a lot of money. My father's a fifth-generation bricklayer, and my mom's a neighborhood school teacher. And the reason that I got into the seat is because people who had like backgrounds and believed in the village concept showed up and put me in the office versus the whole political machine. Now, when you take that support base out, then it becomes an extension of either a political machine or a financial machine, and your electorate will look like whatever folks who are very wealthy wanted to look like, as opposed to empowering individuals to take leadership in their own hands and in their own communities.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Are
you.
there any questions from the justices for this witness?
One clarification about the evidence. As I understand it, this is exhibit number 3.
Demonstrative exhibit, so I
Right.
won't be formally moving it into the record.
I don't think we have a clear, well, I don't have a clear understanding of what's demonstrative exhibit number 2.
We'll be coming back to that through another witness.
Oh, that's what
My
I'm hearing.
apologies.
Okay, thank you. That clears that up.
Yeah.
Ms. Ayatoro?
Is there any way those demonstrative exhibits can be made into paper exhibits that can be admitted for the record?
Yes, and I'll do that shortly after the presentation today.
So can we change it from demonstrative exhibit to actual exhibit, and then you'll just get us the paper copies?
If that's the justice's preferences, I'd be happy to do that.
That would be my preference for the record.
It would make it a lot easier because we're seeing a lot of exhibits, and we're trying to keep in track of the images, but at a certain point after several days we may lose track.
I'd be very happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Churchill?
If I understood your point correctly, troops are deployed in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere, have no problem in registering votes. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do you know if something comparable is made as a provision for the voting of civilian contract employees in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere?
We have not seen that in the legislation, not state legislation.
Okay, so there's, to your knowledge, not a absentee ballot provision that's built for the massive number of contractors that the Pentagon's deployed?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Oui, monsieur. Comme élu, avec vos autres collègues, vous aviez une représentation juridique.
As an elected official, you and your colleagues represent a certain juridic area.
Avez-vous essayé de demander tout simplement le report de ces élections, puisque les éléments n'étaient pas réunis pour avoir de bonnes conditions électorales.
Did you ask, you and your colleagues ask for those elections to be postponed, given that there weren't proper conditions to hold them?
Yes, we did. We actually fought tooth and nail. We went to the Department of Justice in D.C. to get that taken care of, and they told us they were going to assist us, and the next thing was they allowed the election to happen, you know, even above our opposition. And locally, there was a split between leadership who wanted to have the election and folks who didn't want the election. So they used that divisiveness to basically say there'd be more of a problem to not have the election as opposed to having the election on time.
Quand vous dites il s'agit de qui précisément?
When you say they, who do you mean exactly?
They, as far as the Department of Justice officials, the folks that hear our case. We're supposed to actually send an affidavit and testimony, and we filed lawsuits to stop the elections from being held on time. And when we went to the Department of Justice, I was the only person out of the Black Caucus in New Orleans that would actually meet with them to say that they firmly oppose having the election on time. Some other folks, majority elected official we have, were afraid to go up and object to the Department of Justice on record because they had different political agendas. I mean, tu comprends? Mon grand-père n'habite en Haïti.
Très bien, merci. Thank you.
Merci.
Como diz compositor no Brasil, Cazuza,
As
o tempo não espera.
time doesn't wait, as Brazilian composer Souza says.
Nós saímos com algumas pessoas ontem e devo perceber que a autoestima da população negra nessa cidade ela está muito baixa. Nós sentimos isso em 78, na cidade de Salvador, quando nós fizemos uma Assembleia Nacional do Movimento Negro Unificado em Salvador, Bahia.
In Salvador, Bahia.
Could you repeat the translation?
E a gente tomou algumas ações para mudar a situação. Eu quero propor que seja tirada uma comissão de 2, 3 pessoas para fazer um resumo, numa linguagem bem simples, e a gente fazer aqui uma coleta de dinheiro.
Só um minutinho, por favor, senhor Barbosa, o senhor pode repetir, porque a gente está tentando traduzir aqui e é uma confusão pequena aqui. Por favor, o senhor pode começar de novo?
Desde o início.
Por favor, agradeço.
Nós saímos ontem à noite e a gente percebeu
yesterday, and we saw
que a população negra dessa
that the black
cidade
population of this city
está com a autoestima muito baixa.
has a very low self-esteem.
Em 78,
In 1978,
em Salvador, Bahia, o
In
Movimento
Salvador,
Negro
Bahia,
Unificado, nós sentimos a
the
mesma
Unified Black
coisa
Movement felt the same thing.
e tiramos algumas ações para
And we did a couple of actions
mudar
to change
a condição psicológica do
the
nosso povo.
psychological condition of our people.
Eu quero propor que a gente tire uma comissão de 2 ou 3 pessoas,
I would like to get together a commission of 2 or 3 people
que a gente faça uma coleta de dinheiros aqui nesse plenário.
so that we can get together
E essa comissão ela faça um resumo
a commission to do a summary,
bem simplificado
a very simple summary,
e que a gente tenha condições de rodar até amanhã cedo
to circulate
50 mil ou 100 mil panfletinhos para ser distribuída na população negra
to
dessa
circulate
cidade aqui,
some
aproveitando
kind of pamphlet to the black people of this city,
esse Tribunal
taking
Internacional
advantage of
do
the fact
furacão
that we're all here in
Katrina,
this tribunal right now on Katrina,
as comitivas internacionais e dos
with various
estados
representatives,
aqui desse país,
various international representatives and various state representatives.
que com certeza vai dar a moral suficiente para
And I believe, without a doubt, that this kind of action would give the kind of
mudar o
moral
astral
boost
do povo negro desta cidade.
Would give a
do
morale
estado.
boost to the black people of this city.
And if I can I answer that?
Aproveitar, inclusive,
And
a
also,
presença e a
take
ação,
advantage
o
of
apoio
the
dos
presence
parlamentares
and
negros aqui no tribunal.
the help of the black parliamentarians here.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for offering that to us here in New Orleans. And since most of you are not from here, let me just explain to you why black folks are where they're at right now. First of all, we're losing 400 people more a month dying. Okay, and from what the health director is telling us is because of broken hearts, medical supplies, facility infrastructure, and the lack of psychological assistance from assistance. Secondly, New Orleans people before the storm lived, each family, on about $16,000 to $19,000 per family per year. That was mostly because, like most of your countries, all of our families lived together in the same neighborhoods and in the same communities. A lot of those times, the older person of the community or the family was the leader of that family block. After the flood, a lot of people have lost, either through death or dislocation, that leadership and that hierarchy in their families. So then the displaced village or community was placed all over the country. So now